For Voice of Russia Radio News in Washington, I'm Kate Zickel. President Barack Obama says South Sudan could be in trouble. Fighting across Africa into the world's newest nation is causing unrest as Obama sent 45 U.S. service members to South Sudan this week. The State Department said earlier this week that U.S. citizens currently in South Sudan should leave immediately, and it ordered the departure of non-emergency U.S. government personnel. According to the government of South Sudan, approximately 500 people have been killed since Sunday evening when rebels attacked the town in Bor. In a speech Thursday, the president said, quote, "Today the future is at risk. South Sudan stands at the precipice. Recent fighting threatens to plunge South Sudan back into the dark days of its past." Joining me now is Dr. Sreeram Chaulia. He's a professor and dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Sreeram, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be on Voice of Russia.
Now, Dr. Chaulia, can you walk us through how South Sudan became a nation in the first place and how things are going over there right now?
In a way, the past is coming back to haunt this newest member state of the United Nations. I'd like to remind the listeners that South Sudan was created as an independent state just 2 years ago. And this was the culmination of nearly 3 decades of armed struggle against the erstwhile unified Sudan, which was ruled by the North, the Arabic North, headquartered in Khartoum. So the unity that had marked the Sudan People's Liberation Movement, as it was called, for independence of South Sudan, was never actually picture perfect. Even in the era when they were fighting for independence against the North, there were these so-called inter-ethnic or inter-tribal differences. But as long as there was a common foe, I think they had stuck together, and it was a very, very long and brutal war. So the hopes of the international community, of the people of the new nation, of the whole of Africa, are all being dashed as we speak, because the hope was that by partitioning Sudan and by creating this new nation state, we're going to have stability, we're going to bring an end to all the wars that have devastated this place, and we're going to recreate, hope in the Nile Valley. But since then, what's happened is that these intra-southern divisions that were already there have been magnified by what some people call a Dinkocracy. Let me explain what that means. Dinka are one of the dominant ethnic groups of South Sudan, from whom the current President Salva Kiir and much of the leadership of the Sudan People's Liberation Army comes from. So instead of making it a broad-based, diverse new regime, the independent state has moved in the direction of Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe. So instead of using the Mandela tactic of unifying all the people, they have used what some people call tribalism, or ethnicization of the state power, by which the Dinka community, the tribe, has cornered most of the ministries and have dominated the security forces and have led to resentment among other groups. So the refusal to create a broad-based South Sudanese nation-building project by President Kiir has unfortunately led to this situation where more and more groups are coming out and rebelling. So the current violence you're seeing is a rebellion by warlords in Jonglei and some of the other northern states of South Sudan that border Sudan. And unfortunately, you cannot also rule out a hand of the erstwhile unified Sudan, which is now just the rump of Sudan. It's just called Sudan, or let's call it North Sudan for clarity, where they are also fueling the fire by seemingly cultivating some of the dissatisfied and disgruntled minorities in South Sudan. And this is all part linked to the war over who's going to secure access to oil. We have to remember South Sudan has one of the world's largest oil deposits, and there's considerable international interest. There are Western corporations involved. And so the pot is boiling, and unfortunately a lot of people are being killed, abducted, and disappeared ever since President Kiir fired his former Vice President, Riek Machar, who belongs to the Nuer tribe, and which has always resented the domination of the Dinkas. So, it seems like a familiar tale coming from post-colonial ruins across Africa, but it's also a tale where they avoided the Mandela example, the shining example, and they went down the ruinous path of tribalism, and now the country is in tatters, and I'm afraid the dream of the people of South Sudan has been practically ruined because of the extreme brutality that we are witnessing. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is saying that it's a catastrophe.
It's brutal. Well, Doctor, I did want to ask you on that note, do you think that perhaps with all of the fighting going on there and all of the complications that we've been seeing, especially over the last week, do you think that the future of South Sudan is in jeopardy, or is this simply something that the country has to grow past and grow to be better?
Well, I hope that things will stabilize, although it will need, as I said, reorganization of the ministries, of the security system, and making it a more ethnically tolerant and pluralistic polity. Right now, the signs are not good, but I don't want to write off South Sudan because people sacrificed a lot to attain independence over 30 years. And I think the people do not accept the divisions created by the political infighting between the president and his former vice president, because many people view it also as a power struggle, which has been given a kind of a veneer of ethnic discord. And often what happens, we have seen in Africa before, is that people use tribal identities in order to grind their own axes and to capture power. So I do hope that, the people will stand up to this. The African Union must do a lot to prevent collapse of South Sudan. South Sudan is dependent on a lot of foreign aid, including American aid. And I think the U.S. government and everybody else must step in. If they really are interested in stabilizing the place, they need to remind the government that, as well as the rebels, some of whom have themselves also committed atrocities in the name of the Nuer community's rights against the Dinka, that, this is an internal power struggle with a past history. And let's not forget the historical legacy. I mean, we can always blame African elites for all their corruption and venality and failure to be as great as Mandela. But remember that the differences between Dinka and Nuer were also colonially inherited in the 19th century due to British colonial manipulations. The Dinka were supposed to be closer to the ruling colonial elites, while the Nuer were not. You have cattle. It's a complex conflict. But I feel like it can be demilitarized with the intervention of the African Union. I'm encouraged by the efforts of the AU to send a mission to try and broker peace. We are missing Mandela so much because he used to be so involved in bringing peace in Burundi, in Central Africa, in these regions as an elder statesman. And today, unfortunately, even the African Union seems to be short of ideas of how to resolve this. So it's a grim scenario, but we can say these are the post-natal pangs of a new nation, and hopefully the bloodletting will stop.
So you have hope for the country. That's good. Doctor, one final question before we let you go. President Obama has offered aid to South Sudan, but what are other countries doing to help?
Well, because of the oil, there is a great deal of interest in the international community to make the South Sudan work. And in fact, some people argue that there is, because of the codependence between the North and the South, that eventually they will settle down because they have to share revenues. The South doesn't have its own refining and pipeline capacities to export, so it's dependent on the North. But the North, which is President Bashir's Sudan, which is headquartered in Khartoum, has unfortunately also been playing the role of a spoilsport, as I mentioned before, by playing a divide and rule strategy to weaken the new South Sudan state. So all these factors mean that, we need a concerted effort on the part of the international community, as well as by the neighboring countries. Ethiopia, which is the headquarters of the African Union, we have to really hope that they will rise to the occasion. Or else, and remember, neighboring Central African Republic also has its problems right now with its own internal violence. That's also been disturbing, with some people saying that it's close to a genocide. So we are looking at a fragile Central African region, and a lot needs to be done between now and a better future for these people of South Sudan.
Certainly. Well, Doctor, thank you so much for taking the time to speak.